lot of people think you've got no chance of winning. What's the point? Hang on, just to be clear. So you don't think Israel has a right to exist? Maybe you've consumed a lot more OnlyFans content than me. Why do you have a problem with women's naked bodies?
Oh. Hey everyone, this is Matt Wills with Defining Ethos. So I saw this interaction where Piers attempted to take down James Fishback, who's running for governor of Florida. Now, I don't really know anything about Fishback, but one rule I have is when the media tries to either falsely implicate someone or demonize them, I have to follow that person to see what they're really about, because you'd be surprised how often those people tend to be getting to something real.
One of the big things you've been on recently, you've been on a very critical run against Israel, particularly for roping America into the war in Iran as you see it, because you say they're too cowardly to fight for themselves, although they are fighting, obviously, in Iran. It's interesting because in November 2024, a few weeks after October the 7th, you said this.
So Trump moved an embassy, got Muslim-majority countries for the first time ever to recognize the rightful existence of the Jewish state of Israel, and that justifies the heinous attack we saw on October 7th. Iran was only exporting 150,000 barrels of oil a day under Trump. Now they're exporting 1.6 million. They're making hundreds of billions of dollars a year more. That emboldens them to give their proxies weapons, money, and the vigor to attack the Jewish state. And that is unacceptable in the international community.
So a lot of people look at that clip and the extended version and other comments you made at the time and thought, well, here's a really staunch supporter of Israel and the Israeli government and the relationship with America. And now you appear to have done a massive U-turn on this and become incredibly critical of them. A, do you accept that characterization? And if so, explain the change in mind.
Well, Piers, I'm glad you played that clip and gave the full context. I'm grateful for that. What I said in that clip, I stand by today, which is that Iran should never be funding the crazy terroristic proxies of Hezbollah or the Houthis or Hamas. And I've also been critical of the Israeli government. What I'm especially critical of is the fact that they now want $200 billion for the Pentagon to fight a war that Marco Rubio himself said we are fighting because Israel was the proximate catalyst for getting us in this war. So two things can be true at the same time, Piers. You understand the nuance. The first thing that's true is that, no, Israel should not be attacked by Iran. And then number two is that the United States should not lose free speech rights or send billions of dollars of taxpayer money to the Israeli government every single year. And so I'm going to...
So that's actually a standard stance that a lot of Americans have right now. So sure, there are those that are staunch supporters of Israel that want America to just back them entirely in everything they do. And on the other hand, there's this growing movement that's totally against the behaviors that they've seen from Israel and would like us to really contain their efforts. So what he's saying here is like, hey, terrorists are bad, they shouldn't be doing that, but at the same time, Israel can handle themselves. We don't need to be funding them, fighting wars for them, or instituting anti-BDS laws. Let America focus on Americans.
Speak the truth in a way that I think people in my state appreciate.
Okay,
It's not
and
either
just to be
or.
clear, do you believe that Israel has a right to exist?
I believe that countries don't have right to exist, but I believe that people have a right to exist, and Jewish Floridians, like Christian and Muslim Floridians, have a right to exist in my state, and I will defend that right. Piers, I condemn all forms of anti-Semitism.
Hang on, just to be clear, so you don't think Israel has a right to exist?
I don't think that communist China has a right to exist, but I think the Han Chinese as an ethnicity
I'm not talking about China. I'm talking specifically about Israel, which, as you know, the Israeli government is emphatic that it has this right to exist, and that right is threatened by its neighbours, many of whom want to cause it harm, through the terrorist proxies from Iran in particular. So the issue of whether it has a right to exist is a very hot one, as you know. So just to be clear, you just don't think they have a right to exist, Israel?
So here, Piers is purposefully not understanding what Fishback is saying in order to get a volatile clip, right? So this is clip farming. So James is saying countries don't have an inherent right to exist, kind of like the same way you would say banks shouldn't be too big to fail. Countries and political structures have to maintain their existence, and they've got to make careful and purposeful choices towards that. You know, clearly many countries and civilizations have come and gone over history, so that statement is fairly accurate. So, what Piers is doing here is trying to utilize Fishback's philosophy by getting him to make a clear statement that would harm his campaign. So, if James actually fell for this and clearly said Israel didn't have a right to exist, Piers would simply clip that. That clip would be at the beginning of his video. It would be all over X. People wouldn't even bother to watch the video or understand the philosophy that he's got. So it would do real damage to his campaign. It's messed up.
I don't think that any country
No,
has
I know
a
you
right
said
to
that.
exist.
I'm not talking about any country. I'm talking about specifically Israel.
Specifically Israel, and specifically and generally every country in the world does not have an inherent right to exist.
Good.
Who has a right to exist are people, and that includes Jewish Floridians who are struggling just as Christian Floridians are under the weight of a cost of living crisis, Piers, and I'm going to fight for them every single day as their next governor.
Okay, let's get to the sin tax. You've proposed a 50% sin tax on OnlyFans creators to discourage what you call immoral behavior. So just explain that.
Well, there was a time not too long ago in the United States of America where young girls aspired to be cooks and lawyers and reporters and doctors, and nowadays they are resigned to the fact that if they have an unexpected expense or they need to cover their rent or groceries, the quickest way for them to do that is being exploited by the OnlyFans platform. And so I respect women. I respect them enough to think that they are capable of anything they put their minds to, and I never want a woman in my state to be exploited by the online sex slavery that is OnlyFans.
But
And that's why as governor,
I thought it was a voluntary platform.
It's not. There's nothing voluntary about a platform that exploits women and forces them to sell nude photos on the internet. Piers.
When you say
this is a
force,
classic
again,
case.
just to be clear about what OnlyFans is, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding about OnlyFans is it's voluntary. No one's forcing you to do it. People go on OnlyFans, create an account, and they charge money for whatever they want to put on their account. I'm not sure where the exploitation element, as you're articulating it, is.
Well, this is often the defense of sex trafficking, that a 15-year-old girl is voluntarily
hang on. Sex
entering.
trafficking is illegal.
And I believe that OnlyFans should be illegal as well.
Really?
There's nothing
Why?
voluntary
what law are they
about,
breaking?
Well, there's nothing. Well, I would change the law. I would change the law. That's how we do things. I mean, slavery wasn't illegal, and then we said this is a moral repugnancy.
But who's enslaving people on OnlyFans?
And we changed the law.
I'm really curious. I don't. Maybe you've consumed a lot more OnlyFans content than me, and you see
I've never
trafficking
been on
and
OnlyFans,
slavery and everything
Piers.
else. But I'm not aware that that is what OnlyFans is. It has a lot of adult content, but legal adult content, which is monitored according to the law, and that people who have accounts there do so voluntarily. They open accounts and they charge money. We have somebody I'm going to bring in a moment, Sophie Rain, who has made $43 million from her account on OnlyFans. I don't think she's been enslaved or exploited. I think she's perfectly happy and enjoys what she does. I mean, I'll talk to her in a moment, but why do you feel she's a slave?
So I feel that this is a classic case of Stockholm syndrome, where the individual, the victim, the enslaved person doesn't feel that they have real agency. This goes back to Sociology 101, Piers, that someone is induced to believing they have choice, they have agency, when in fact they can't make a decision for themselves. I want young girls in my state to...
I'm not entirely sure of James' specific meaning when he's saying slavery, exploitation, and Stockholm syndrome. He could clean up the wording a bit so it's easier to understand where he's coming from, but it could be taken a few different ways. So one is, there's definitely an exploitative side to OnlyFans. Some women weren't even trying to get into the lifestyle. Some get validation on platforms like Instagram, and they get flown out to Florida or California where they party with people. Someone happens to be from an agency and they romanticize what the agency can do for them. And because most women don't make that much money doing it, they're much easier to exploit. So those agencies will then pressure them to explore nude modeling and then further pornographic content. And they'll use this in order to use the account's messaging. So that way they can actively create false relationships with lonely men who will send in money because they think they're actually communicating with or building a relationship with the woman. That rabbit hole of grooming and coercion does go deep. Now, he could be meaning that economically, women feel that they have no way to get ahead unless they turn to something like OnlyFans. So they may be compromising their morals because they feel as if they don't have much of a choice. And if that's the case, the policy to tax pornography and use the money to open better pathways for higher paying opportunities actually makes a lot of sense. Also, he could mean that the practice could give you relief or success now, but many young people don't understand the implication of publishing yourself online like that. It will have an effect on potential careers or future relationships, so in a sense, it traps or enslaves you from opportunity in the future. He could also mean this in a sense that they're getting so much validation for destructive things. So things like likes and views, messages that make you feel good, and then they point you in the direction of doing some things that you wouldn't want to do. But because you're chasing the greater validation, it ends up trapping you, and you keep pushing past your moral limitations until they simply don't exist anymore. This industry has a large moral and psychological effect on men and women in society, and just because it's initially voluntary doesn't mean you knew where you would end up.
Aspire to be astronauts, doctors, nurses, small business owners. I believe a radical thing that women can do anything they put their minds to, Piers, and I don't want them resigned
So do you
to
think,
the fact
just to be
that they
clear,
have
do
to
you think
sell.
modeling is modeling to you immoral?
I think naked modeling, however you want to euphemize it, naked modeling is immoral.
I mean,
Absolutely.
Cindy Crawford was one of the greatest iconic supermodels of all time. She's done naked modeling. So is she a sinner? Is she immoral? Should she be paying 50% back of her income?
Well, in that particular act of modeling, yes, and modeling nude, but you and I both know that Cindy Crawford was not known for her nude modeling. She was predominantly known for modeling for runway shows.
So should we
in London,
retrospectively
Paris,
go
and New
back
York.
to every supermodel who's ever posed nude and get 50% back of their income from those pictures?
As much as I'd love to do that, that's not legally possible. What I'm going to do is I'm going to raise an OnlyFans syntax.
Why do you have a problem with women's naked bodies, James?
I don't have a...
That's a motive fallacy. If you ask a question that ascribes a false or negative intent, then no matter if what James said was positive or negative, the audience will view it as negative. It's a cheap trick if you don't want to contend with the argument or learn about the position, or if you really just want to destroy reputation. Also, that idea you want to ban pornography so you must hate women's bodies, that assumes that if you love women's bodies, you must be pro-pornography.
By the way, Piers, you keep talking about women. There are thousands of men on OnlyFans, and this is going to apply just as equally to them. And so you're the one selectively outraged about women. If you're a man or a woman, if you're a man or a woman producing or consuming this content, and by the way, Piers, what you haven't brought up is that as governor, I would also levy a consumption tax. I'm not going to spare the men in this equation as well. If you're a young man and you're watching pornography, put down the phone, go to church, pray, and find a real God-fearing woman. Society is not going to be dictated by men and women commodifying and using one another in these ephemeral social relationships. No, it's not transactional sex. It is a romantic experience that is reserved for a man and a woman in the sanctity of marriage.
That's a great point. Society's been heading towards a more materialistic view of relationships between men and women. I've heard a lot of women consider it empowering as it allows them to essentially commodify their assets while they're young at the expense of men. And there's a lot of changes happening with the way sexes are currently viewing each other within certain subcultures. So if their interactions with each other are strictly sexual, whether that's online or in hookup culture, how are they really supposed to value each other? As commodities, I guess. Anyway, I thought James Fishback did a fantastic job in not taking the bait. He did a decent job in flipping some of these talking points back at Piers, and I think James actually looks better coming out of this than if he didn't have to contend with the clip farming attempts. Honestly, I don't really know much about this guy. I saw him once in that Jubilee video, but now I'm more interested to learn about him. As always, thanks for watching.